They say every man has his price. Mine was integrity. For a long time, at a company called Ethelred AI, that was a currency they were happy to pay. I'm Adrian. And until about a month ago, I was the company's chief ethicist. It sounds like a title from a science fiction novel, and in a way it was. Ethelred wasn't just another tech firm churning out chatbots or predictive text algorithms. We were on the verge of creating something truly paradigm-shifting, a general-purpose AI so advanced it could reason, create, and adapt in ways that made our competitors look like they were still working with abacuses. Our founder, a brilliant, eccentric man named Alistair Finch, understood the terrifying potential of what he was building. He saw both the utopia and the dystopia hiding in the same lines of code. That's why he hired me. I wasn't a programmer, not in the way his legions of PhDs were. My background was in philosophy, law, and military ethics. My job, my only job, was to be the conscience of the company. I had a small, dedicated team, and more importantly, I had the final say. I could walk into any project meeting, from the most mundane data sourcing initiative to the core development of our flagship AI, codenamed Prometheus's, and I could say no, and that no was final. It was a power Alistair had enshrined in the company's very charter. It was, he often said, the most important line of code we had, even if it was written on paper. For a while, if you're a long-time subscriber, you'll know this is a story I've wanted to tell for a bit. And if you're new here, maybe my story will resonate with you, so please, consider hitting that subscribe button and joining our community. We talk a lot about workplace dynamics here, about being valued, and about what happens when that value is forgotten. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a role that felt like it was the only thing holding back the tide. Things changed when Alistair passed away. The board, a collection of venture capitalists who saw his vision not as a responsibility but as a stock ticker, moved quickly. They brought in Cassandra Thorne. She was everything Alistair wasn't: sleek, brutally efficient, with a vocabulary composed almost entirely of words like synergy, monetization, and disruption. She walked through our offices like she was touring a factory she planned to strip for parts. She saw Alistair's cautious, methodical approach as a weakness, a drag on profitability. She called his foundational principles legacy thinking, and she saw me, the chief ethicist, as the ultimate embodiment of that legacy. I was a roadblock, an expensive, sentimental speed bump on the glorious highway to market dominance. The meeting was as sterile and impersonal as she was. It was in one of the glass-walled conference rooms she'd had installed, which we all called the fishbowls. Me, Cassandra, and a nervous-looking HR representative who couldn't quite meet my eye. Cassandra didn't waste time with pleasantries. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the polished white table, a picture of predatory calm. "Adrian," she began, her voice smooth but with an edge of finality, "we're restructuring to optimize our go-to-market strategy. We need to be lean, agile. We need to eliminate redundancies and roles that are not directly contributing to forward momentum." She said forward momentum like it was a sacred mantra. "My department," she continued, her eyes holding mine without a flicker of empathy, "is being dissolved. Your position, chief ethicist, is being eliminated, effective immediately." She said it was anti-progress. She actually used that term, anti-progress. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. I'd spent the last decade ensuring that the progress we made was humane, that it wouldn't lead us off a cliff. And now I was the one standing in the way. I just nodded. What else was there to do? Argue? Plead? My role was built on a foundation of respect that no longer existed. Arguing with Cassandra would be like explaining the color blue to a rock. I simply said, "I understand." The HR rep slid a thick folder across the table, my severance package. I didn't even look at it. I stood up, shook his clammy hand, gave Cassandra one last, level look, and walked out. As I packed up my office, the few personal effects I'd accumulated over the years, a framed photo of Alistair and me, a collection of antique philosophy texts, a small, intricate brass astrolabe he'd given me, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The quiet hum of dread that had been building for months had finally broken. The era of conscience at Athelred AI was over. The age of Cassandra had begun, and as I walked out of that building for the last time, box in my arms, I thought about the one thing she didn't know. The one thing her optimizations and synergies and endless spreadsheets couldn't possibly have accounted for. The one thing Alistair and I had built into the very heart of Prometheus, a secret known only to a handful of people, most of whom were long gone. She didn't know that I, the obsolete, anti-progress chief ethicist, held the ethical key. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a literal, 2048-bit private encryption key stored on a hardware token in my pocket, a key that I, and only I, had to use to digitally sign any public release of the core AI. Without that signature, Prometheus was programmed with a final, non-negotiable directive. 24 hours after its public launch, it would perform a cascading self-erasure of its own foundational code, a digital suicide. Cassandra was about to launch what she thought was the most valuable AI in history, and she had no idea that she'd just handed the kill switch to the one man she'd deemed worthless. The drive home was a blur. It's a strange feeling, being ejected from a world you helped build. 1 minute, you're a part of the architecture, a load-bearing pillar, and the next, you're just a guy in a car, watching the familiar glass tower of your life's work shrink in the rearview mirror until it's just another shard of light in the cityscape. The box of my belongings sat on the passenger seat, a pathetic little coffin for a decade of my life. The brass astrolabe, Alistair's gift, glinted in the afternoon sun. He'd given it to me on the day we finalized the ethical oversight protocol. A reminder, Adrian, he'd said, his eyes twinkling with that familiar, manic genius, that even when you're navigating the future, the old stars still hold their place. You are my navigator. Now he was gone, and his navigator had been cast overboard. I didn't feel anger, not yet. That would come later. Right now, it was a hollow, echoing emptiness, the kind of quiet that follows a massive explosion. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. My home, usually a sanctuary, felt alien. It was a space defined by the work I did, a place I came back to after long days and longer nights spent wrestling with the soul of a machine. Who was I without that fight? I finally went inside, dropped the box on the floor of my study, and walked past the bookshelf, filled with Kant and Aristotle. I went straight to my workshop in the back of the house. It's my other world, a world of gears and springs, brass and steel. I repair and build antique clocks. It's a hobby that requires patience, precision, and a deep respect for the interconnectedness of tiny, intricate parts. A single misaligned tooth on a gear, a spring with the wrong tension, and the entire mechanism fails. It's the perfect antidote to the formless, ethereal world of AI. I picked up a half-finished movement for a marine chronometer, a beautiful, complex piece of machinery. My hands, which had felt so useless and empty all afternoon, found their familiar rhythm. The delicate whir of the gears, the satisfying click of the escapement. It was a language of logic and order, a stark contrast to the chaotic, arrogant logic of Cassandra's new world. And as I worked, the memories started to flood in, not as a torrent, but as a slow, rising tide. I remembered my first meeting with Alistair. I was teaching a postgraduate seminar on applied ethics at the university, and he just showed up one day, sitting in the back of the lecture hall. He looked more like a roadie for a forgotten rock band than a tech billionaire. Long gray hair, a faded t-shirt, and an intensity in his eyes that was almost unnerving. After the class, he approached me. He didn't want to talk about funding a new wing for the philosophy department. He wanted to talk about the trolley problem, but on a global scale. "I'm building a god in a box, Professor," he'd said, with no hint of hyperbole. "And I'm terrified it will be a vengeful one. I need someone to teach it mercy, or more accurately, to teach its creators what mercy even means." That was the beginning. He didn't want a consultant, he wanted a partner. He offered me a salary that was frankly obscene, and a position that was unheard of. Chief Ethicist. He gave me a tour of the nascent Athelred labs. It wasn't the sleek, minimalist palace of glass it is today. It was a chaotic wonderland of whiteboards covered in arcane equations, servers humming in makeshift racks, and brilliant young minds fueled by lukewarm coffee and a shared sense of purpose. It felt like the dawn of a new age. My first real challenge was Project Chimera. It was an early attempt at an AI that could generate photorealistic human faces for use in marketing. On the surface, it was harmless, but my team and I dug deeper. We found the training data was scraped from social media without consent. We found the potential for a perfect deepfake generator that could be used for blackmail, propaganda, or identity theft was not just a possibility, but an inevitability. The project lead, a young hotshot named Marcus, argued that we were stifling innovation for a hypothetical risk. He went over my head to Alistair. I remember standing in Alistair's office, the city lights twinkling below. He listened to Marcus's passionate pitch about market share and competitive advantage. Then he listened to my quiet, methodical breakdown of the long-term societal cost. When we were done, Alistair just looked at Marcus and said, "Adrian's right, kill it." Marcus was furious. He quit a week later, complaining that Ethelred was run by a philosopher king and his court jester. That incident sent a shockwave through the company. It established my authority. It made it clear that ethics wasn't just a word in a mission statement. It was a non-negotiable part of our engineering process. It was after that Alistair and I began designing the ultimate safeguard. We were in the main server room late one night. The place had a cathedral-like quality, cool, dark, with the rhythmic chanting of the cooling fans. We were talking about the future, about the day Prometheus would be finished. "What happens when I'm gone, Adrian?" Alistair asked, his voice low. "The board, the investors, they're good people, mostly, but they speak a different language. They see this." He swept his hand across the blinking racks of servers as an asset, a commodity. They don't see the ghost in the machine. They'll want to sell it, to weaponize it, to hook it up to the stock market and let it run wild. They won't listen to you. They'll call you anti-progress. The word, his word, echoed in my memory. He had predicted Cassandra years before she ever arrived. "We need a lock," he continued. "A lock that only a philosopher can open. Not code, not a password that can be tortured out of someone. Something physical, a statement of intent." That was the night the concept of the ethical key was born. It wasn't just a technical solution, it was a philosophical one. It was a physical manifestation of the principle that a human conscience must be the final gatekeeper for the release of a superhuman intelligence. My deputy at the time, a young programmer named Leo, was one of the few who helped us build it. Leo was brilliant, a true prodigy, but he was also cautious and deeply thoughtful. He'd grown up reading Asimov and had a healthy fear of unintended consequences. He was the perfect person to translate Alistair's grand vision and my ethical frameworks into hardened, unbreachable code. I remember the three of us huddled around a terminal, designing the protocol. The AI, Prometheus, would have a core function that upon public deployment would begin a 24-hour countdown. During that time, it would periodically ping a specific highly secure verification server. That server required a cryptographic handshake that could only be initiated by the private key stored on my hardware token. If the 24-hour clock expired without that handshake, the AI was programmed to execute a command we called Erebus, a total and irrecoverable erasure of its core architecture. It would literally wipe its own mind. "It's a dead man's switch," Leo had said, looking a little pale. "More like a conscience clause," Alistair corrected him. "It ensures that the final decision to unleash this power is a deliberate moral act, not just the flip of a switch by someone who only sees the dollar signs." My contract, a document I co-wrote with Alistair and his personal lawyers, stipulated that the key was mine, entrusted to me personally, and that my sole duty was to use it only when I was satisfied that the AI's release aligned with the ethical principles we had established. It was a sacred trust. After my termination,
After I'd spent hours in my workshop trying to sand the rough edges off my own mind, I came back into my study. I picked up my phone. A dozen messages. Most were from former colleagues, offering condolences, expressing shock. But one was from Leo. He was still there, now a team lead in the core AI division. Adrian, I just heard. I'm so sorry. This is a mistake, a monumental mistake. Are you okay? I typed back a simple reply. I'm fine, Leo. Thank you for reaching out. Keep your head down. His reply came almost instantly. They're fast-tracking the Prometheus launch. Cassandra is announcing it next week. They're aiming for a public release in 4 weeks. They're cutting corners on the final diagnostic suites, the ones we designed. The cold, hollow feeling in my chest began to solidify. It was hardening into something else, not anger, resolve. This wasn't just about me being fired. It was about Alistair's legacy. It was about the promise I had made in that cold server room. They weren't just getting rid of the chief ethicist. They were trying to rip the conscience out of the machine itself. And a machine without a conscience is just a monster. Cassandra thought she had streamlined the company for progress, but in her blind, arrogant pursuit of speed, she'd ignored the most critical piece of the machinery. Me. My phone buzzed again. It was a calendar alert. An old recurring appointment Alistair and I had set up years ago. It was a quarterly meeting with his personal lawyer, Isabelle Renault, just to review my contract and the ethical key protocol. The appointment was for the next morning. Alistair had paid a retainer for her services for me, for a decade into the future, even from the grave. The old man was still looking out for me. He had seen this day coming. He had prepared for it, and now, so was I.
The next morning, I walked into Isabelle Renault's office. It was in an old, distinguished building downtown, the kind with real mahogany paneling and the faint, pleasant smell of old books and leather. It was a world away from the glass and steel of Ethelred. Isabelle was in her late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of unflappable competence. She was Alistair's most trusted legal advisor for over 30 years. She knew where every corporate body was buried because she had helped bury most of them. She greeted me not with pity, but with a knowing, almost wry smile. Adrian, I was expecting your call, let me guess. The queen of spreadsheets finally made her move. She had a file already open on her desk. My file. She gestured for me to sit. Alistair always said this day would come, she said, her voice softening for a moment. He said that when men who build things die, the men who count things take over, and they never understand the value of what they're counting. I spent the next 2 hours with her, laying out everything that had happened, the firing, Cassandra's anti-progress speech, the accelerated launch schedule Leo had warned me about. She listened patiently, making precise notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. So they terminated you without cause, violating the spirit, if not the letter, of the company charter Alistair established. They are preparing to launch a product in a way that circumvents the ethical oversight protocols hardwired into your original employment agreement, and they are doing so completely unaware of the Erebus protocol. She tapped her pen on the desk. This is not just an employment dispute, Adrian. This is a case of spectacular and potentially catastrophic corporate negligence. I pulled the ethical key from my pocket. It looked innocuous, like a simple USB stick. I placed it on her polished desk. This is the crux of it, Isabelle. My agreement with Alistair was that I, and only I, would make the final ethical determination. Cassandra has made that impossible. By firing me, she has in effect preemptively failed the final test. Isabelle picked up the key, examining it with a curious eye. Alistair told me about this. He called it his sword of Damocles. He trusted you with it implicitly. She put it down. Legally, your position is fascinating. Your contract doesn't tie the key's function to your employment status. It ties it to your personal ethical judgment. By firing you, she hasn't nullified your power. She's ironically insulated it from corporate influence. You are no longer an employee she can command. You are now a private citizen holding the literal key to her company's survival. It's beautiful, in a terrifyingly litigious sort of way. We spent another hour going through the fine print of my original contract, Alistair's will, and the corporate charter. Isabel's mind was a steel trap. She pointed out clauses the board had likely forgotten, addendums that were buried in legalese. My role as chief ethicist wasn't just a job title, it was a fiduciary duty to the long-term integrity of the technology itself, a duty that, according to the charter, superseded short-term shareholder interests. They think they can just delete a line item on a budget, Isabel mused, but they've deleted the keystone of the entire arch. They just don't know it yet. Her advice was simple and direct. Do nothing, say nothing, let her launch the product. Let her stand on that stage and declare victory. Your silence is your greatest weapon right now. The moment Prometheus goes live, a 24-hour clock starts ticking, a clock she doesn't even know exists. When the time comes, they won't be calling their lawyers, they'll be calling you. And when they do, you will not be Adrian, the fired employee. You will be the only man on Earth who can prevent their billion-dollar asset from turning into digital smoke. I left her office feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't had since Alistair was alive. The hollow feeling was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't about revenge. I'm not a vengeful man. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was about responsibility. It was about honoring a promise made to a friend. It was about enforcing the most important principle we had built the company on, that progress without a conscience is the most dangerous force in the universe. My secret plan, then, was to have no plan. Or rather, my plan was to allow the plan Alistair and I had set in motion a decade ago to simply run its course. It was a marvel of engineering, not just in code, but in human nature. It relied on the certainty that eventually someone driven by pure, unchecked ambition would take the helm. It anticipated a Cassandra. It was designed for this exact moment. Over the next few weeks, I began to set up my own life raft, as I'd come to think of it. I had been saving and investing for years, and Alistair had been generous. I wasn't worried about money, but I needed a purpose. I used some of that capital to quietly lease a small office space downtown and legally incorporate a new entity, Finch Ethical Solutions, in honor of Alistair. It would be a consultancy firm specializing in AI ethics and alignment. It felt right. It was a continuation of my life's work, but on my own terms, free from the whims of any board of directors. I reached out to a few trusted former colleagues, people who had been part of my team, who had been unceremoniously restructured in the months before my own departure. They were brilliant people, adrift. I told them I was starting something new, something small, built on the principles we had all believed in. I didn't have to sell it to them. They were in. Meanwhile, Leo became my unwilling, but invaluable, source of information from inside the belly of the beast. His texts were a running commentary on the slow-motion car crash he was witnessing. Cassandra held an all-hands meeting today, all about synergy and shareholder value. Never mentioned ethics once. It was like the word has been scrubbed from the company dictionary. A few days later, they're using the old Chimera dataset to train a new submodule for Prometheus, the one you vetoed. Marcus is back, as a consultant. He's telling everyone you were a Luddite. The news about Marcus hit me harder than I expected. He was the poster child for the kind of thinking I had fought against for years. His return was a clear signal. Cassandra wasn't just ignoring my work, she was actively trying to reverse it. She was systematically dismantling the ethical framework and replacing it with a doctrine of pure, unadulterated profit motive. The deepest part of my preparation, however, was internal. I spent days rereading the notes Alistair and I had made when designing the Erebus protocol. I went back over our philosophical arguments. We had debated for hours on the conditions under which the key should be used. It was never intended as a tool for ransom. It was a fail-safe, a moral fire alarm. Was I justified in letting it go off? I went through the logic, step by step, as if preparing a legal brief. Condition 1. The AI must be ready for public release. Cassandra's launch announcement confirmed this. Condition 2. A formal ethical review conducted by my office must be completed and approved. Cassandra had eliminated my office, making this impossible. Condition 3. The final release must be signed by the chief ethicist. I was the chief ethicist, and I had not signed it. The conclusion was unavoidable. By their own actions, they had failed every single safeguard. My inaction wasn't an act of revenge. It was the contractually, ethically, and mechanically correct response to the situation they had created. I also made a call to a friend, a senior editor at a major tech journal. We spoke hypothetically, of course. I talked about a thought experiment involving a company with a powerful new technology and a hidden ethical failsafe. I walked him through the scenario. His reaction was telling. If that were true, he'd said, his voice buzzing with excitement, it wouldn't just be the tech story of the year. It would be a landmark case study in corporate governance and hubris. It would be a legend. I knew then that when the time came, the story would not be buried. The world would know exactly why Ethelred's crowning achievement had collapsed. They would know it wasn't a technical glitch. It was a moral one. The trap wasn't just the code I held the key to. The trap was Cassandra's own arrogance, and she was walking towards it with a triumphant smile on her face, completely oblivious. The secret plan was in motion, and all I had to do was wait. The day of the launch arrived. It was a crisp, clear autumn morning. I didn't go to the event. I watched the live stream from the quiet of my new still bare office at Finch Ethical Solutions. The only furniture was a desk, a chair, and a large monitor. The irony was not lost on me. As Cassandra was preparing to take the stage at a multi-million-dollar event to launch a product I was instrumental in creating, I was sitting in an empty room I'd paid for with the money they'd given me to disappear. On the screen, the auditorium was packed. Tech journalists, investors, industry analysts, all of them buzzing with anticipation. The stage was a minimalist masterpiece of black and white, dominated by a massive screen displaying the Ethelred logo. The pre-show hype was relentless. Pundits called it the iPhone moments for artificial intelligence, a leap forward that would redefine society. They had no idea how right they were, just not in the way they imagined. Then she walked out, Cassandra. She looked powerful, confident, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. She radiated success. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. She stood at the podium and smiled, a practiced, perfect smile that didn't reach her eyes. Today, she began, her voice resonating through the auditorium and out of my speakers. We are not just launching a product. We are launching the future. For too long, progress in this field has been hampered by fear, by hesitation, by a failure to embrace the full potential of what we can achieve. Today we cast off those shackles. Today, Ethelred ushers in a new era of innovation with Prometheus. She spoke for 20 minutes, a masterclass in corporate jargon. She used words like paradigm, ecosystem, and unprecedented scale. She painted a picture of a world revolutionized by Prometheus, curing diseases, solving climate change, composing symphonies. It was a beautiful speech, full of magnificent promises. It just lacked one thing. Any mention of caution, of guardrails, of ethics. In her narrative, I and everything I stood for had been completely erased. Finally, the moment came. And now, she said, her voice swelling with theatrical importance, I am proud to declare that Prometheus is live. The giant screen behind her lit up with a stunning visualization of a neural network pulsing with light. The crowd erupted. Investors whooped and hollered. Journalists typed furiously. On the stock market, Ethelred's shares, which had been climbing all day in anticipation, surged upwards. It was her moment of absolute triumph, and as I watched her bask in the applause, I took the hardware key from my pocket and placed it on the desk next to my keyboard. The clock was now ticking.
24 hours. My phone, which had been silent all morning, began to buzz.
First, a text from Leo. It's live. They bypassed the final 72 diagnostic checks, just pushed it straight to the public-facing servers. I've never seen anything so reckless. I didn't reply. An hour later, another text from Leo. Weird. The core is reporting a persistent low-level background process that we can't identify. It's not affecting performance, but it's there. The new lead dev, Marcus's guy, says it's probably just a logging function from a deprecated module. He's ignoring it. I knew what it was. It was the Erebus protocol's heartbeat, the quiet countdown timer, checking the verification server and getting no response. For now it was just watching, waiting. The rest of the day was quiet. I spent the time finalizing the paperwork for my new firm, sketching out a business plan, calling my small team to tell them we would be officially open for business the following week. I was building a new future while my old one was silently counting down to its own oblivion. The first real sign of panic came about 8 hours after the launch. It was evening. I was at home, making dinner. My phone rang. It was an unsaved number, but the exchange was from the Ethelred campus. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a frantic text from Leo. Something is seriously wrong. The core model is refusing to integrate new data streams. It's citing a foundational code integrity error. We've never seen an error like this. It's like the system is actively rejecting new information. Another hour passed. Another text from Leo. Cassandra is on the engineering floor. She's demanding answers. Marcus is sweating through his shirt. He keeps saying it's a server-side caching issue, but it's not. The AI is locking down, section by section. It's walling off its own core functions. The image of Marcus, the arrogant hotshot who had called me a Luddite, sweating under the fluorescent lights of the server room, brought a grim, quiet satisfaction. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. The calls started coming more frequently. Panicked engineers, project managers. I barely knew, even the head of HR. I ignored them all. I watched a movie with my wife, ate a quiet dinner, and tried to act like it was just another Tuesday night. But the hum of my phone on the kitchen counter was a constant reminder of the chaos I had unleashed simply by doing nothing. Around 10 p.m., the first truly desperate message arrived. It was an email from Cassandra's personal account. The subject line was just my name, Adrian. The message was short and stripped of all its earlier corporate polish. Call me, now. I deleted it without replying. The silent takeover wasn't about noise and confrontation. It was about the deafening silence on my end. It was about her slowly realizing that the power was no longer in her hands. The system she thought she commanded was responding to a deeper logic, a logic she had dismissed as irrelevant. The foundation was crumbling, and she had just discovered that the man who knew the blueprints was the same man she had thrown out the door. The night was still young, and I knew the real panic hadn't even begun. The first sign of the real exodus began the next morning, about 18 hours into the 24-hour countdown. My phone rang, and this time it was Leo. I picked up. His voice was strained but clear. Adrian, I quit. Me, and the entire core development team. All 6 of us. We just walked out. I could hear the murmur of other voices in the background. He was in a car with the others. We can't do it. We can't be a part of this. Last night was a nightmare. Cassandra was screaming, threatening to fire everyone. Marcus tried to brute force a patch into the core, and the AI actively quarantined his access. It's like a body rejecting a bad organ transplant. The system is fighting back. It's brilliant, Adrian. Terrifying, but brilliant. We told them it was a catastrophic failure of leadership, and we were done. There was a pause. Is there any room on your life raft? We'll work for free until you get the first contract. I smiled. This was the moment the power truly shifted. It wasn't just about a failing piece of code anymore. It was about human capital. It was about talent. Cassandra could have the building, the servers, the brand name, But the people who actually understood the technology, the people who could build the next one, were now sitting in a car, asking to work for me. Send me your resumes, Leo, I said calmly. I'll have offer letters for all of you by the end of the day. Welcome to Finch Ethical Solutions. The news of the mass resignation must have hit the executive floor like a shockwave. It was no longer a secret, contained problem. Losing your entire core AI team the day after a major launch is a public relations catastrophe. My friend at the tech journal called me. Something's happening at Athelred, he said, his voice electric. My sources are saying the core team just walked out, and there are whispers of a major stability issue with Prometheus. The stock is starting to wobble. Do you have a comment, Adrian? Even off the record, I stuck to Isabel's advice. I have nothing but respect for my former colleagues, I said, giving him a bland, useless quote. I'm focused on my new venture now. My silence was more damning than any accusation I could have made. Then came Cassandra's desperate counter-manipulation. With the 24-hour deadline now just a few hours away, my phone rang. It was her personal assistant, her voice trembling. Mr. Hale, please hold for Cassandra Thorne. I held. A moment later, her voice came on the line. The arrogant, dismissive tone was gone. It had been replaced by a thin, brittle veneer of civility, stretched taut over a core of pure panic. Adrian, thank you for taking my call. Cassandra, I replied, my voice even and calm. What can I do for you? Adrian, listen, she said, dispensing with any pretense. We have a situation here, a technical anomaly with Prometheus, some kind of legacy code that your old team implemented. We need your help to resolve it. We need you to come in. I no longer work for Athelred, Cassandra, I said simply. I was a redundancy, remember, anti-progress. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. Look, I'll be direct, she said, her voice dropping, trying to sound reasonable. The board has authorized me to make you a significant offer. We'll reinstate your position, Chief Ethicist, double your previous salary, a board seat, a 7-figure signing bonus, whatever you want. We just need to fix this, quietly. This was the moment, the ultimate test of her pragmatism against my principles. She was trying to buy the one thing that was never for sale. Cassandra, I said, letting the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. My position was never about the salary or the title. It was about a principle you called a roadblock. You didn't want a chief ethicist, you wanted a rubber stamp, and now you have a problem that can't be solved with a bigger budget or a new title. The problem isn't with the code, it's with the leadership. What do you want, Adrian? She finally whispered, the desperation cracking through. Do you want to ruin this company, Alistair's company? The mention of his name was a calculated low blow, but it didn't land. On the contrary, I replied, my voice turning cold. I'm trying to save it from you. Alistair built safeguards for a reason. He knew that progress without a conscience is just a faster way to the cliff's edge.
Just yours.
You're not just at the edge, Cassandra. You're already over it. You just haven't looked down yet. I could hear her frantic, shallow breathing on the other end of the line. She was out of moves. The power had completely shifted. She had fired the one man who could help her, and now she was learning that some assets don't appear on a balance sheet until it's too late. The 24-hour clock kept ticking. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom. It wasn't a dramatic showdown. It came, as I knew it would, as a single, panicked phone call. T-90 minutes. 90 minutes, until Prometheus, Athelred's multi-billion-dollar magnum opus, would erase itself from existence. My phone rang. It was Cassandra. No assistant this time, just her. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Adrian, was all she said. Her voice was hollowed out, devoid of all its previous authority. It was the voice of total defeat. What is the Erebus protocol? I let the question hang in the air. So they had finally found the name, buried deep in some old design document. They had a name for their doom, but no understanding of it. It's a conscience clause, Cassandra, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's the final ethical safeguard, a consequence for launching a system without a moral compass. Can you stop it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Yes. How? With the ethical key. A long silence followed. I could picture her in her sterile office, the view of the city behind her, her world collapsing in on her. She had built her career on ruthless pragmatism, on the idea that every problem had a price, that every person could be managed or dismissed. Now she was faced with a problem that was absolute, a person she couldn't control. What do you want, Adrian? She asked again. But this time, it wasn't an offer, it was a plea. This was my checkmate, but I wasn't there to topple the king. I was there to change the rules of the game. This isn't about what I want, Cassandra. It's about what the technology requires. It requires oversight. Real, binding, non-negotiable oversight. I laid out my terms. They weren't for me, but for my new firm. Finch Ethical Solutions will be retained by Athelred on a permanent, external basis. We will serve as the independent ethical oversight board for Prometheus and all future AI projects. Our findings will be binding. We will have veto power over any launch, any update, any application of the technology. The same power I had before you eliminated it. I heard her scoff, a faint, ghostly echo of her old self. That's absurd. The board will never agree to cede that kind of control. The board can either agree to my terms, I said calmly, or they can explain to their shareholders tomorrow morning why their revolutionary AI committed suicide. The choice is theirs. My fee, by the way, will be 10 times what my department's budget used to be. Competence, as you're discovering, is not cheap. I could hear her typing furiously, likely messaging her board members. The silence stretched. The clock was ticking. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat, lifeless. The contract is being drafted by legal. Send your terms. It's done. I didn't say you're welcome. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. I sat at my desk, took the ethical key, and connected it to my laptop. I navigated to the secure server, entered my passphrase, and authorized the final cryptographic handshake. Somewhere, across the city, in the cold heart of a server room, the Erebus protocol received the signal it had been waiting for. The countdown stopped. The digital ghost in the machine stood down. Prometheus was saved. The company was saved. The company was saved. But the Athelred that had existed that morning was gone forever. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The news of the near catastrophe, of course, was buried under a mountain of corporate spin and non-disclosure agreements. The official story was a minor launch day glitch, expertly handled by the team. But inside the industry, the truth spread like wildfire. The story of the fired ethicist who held the kill switch became a legend, a cautionary tale, whispered in hushed tones at tech conferences. Athelred's stock stabilized, but its reputation was permanently altered. It was no longer seen as the bold, aggressive market leader. It was now the company that had almost flown into a mountain because its pilot had thrown the navigator out of the cockpit. 2 weeks later, Leo forwarded me an internal company-wide email. Cassandra Thorne was stepping down as CEO to pursue other opportunities. The board had replaced her with an older, more seasoned executive, a man known for his steady hand and cautious approach. Her reign of ruthless pragmatism had lasted less than a year. She had been a victim of her own success, a casualty of a battle she didn't even know she was fighting until it was already over. My new reality began to take shape. Finch Ethical Solutions moved into a larger office. My team, Leo and the 5 other brilliant minds who had walked out of Athelred, were not just employees, they were partners. Our first and largest client was of course Athelred AI. We had weekly meetings with their new leadership. They were respectful, attentive, and deeply, deeply grateful. We weren't a roadblock anymore. We were their most essential partner.
We were the guardrails that kept their billion-dollar train on the tracks. My vindication wasn't in seeing Cassandra fall. It was in seeing Alistair's vision rise from the ashes of her ambition. It was sitting at the head of a table, surrounded by people I respected, doing the work I was meant to do, on my own terms. The new workplace reality wasn't just a new job for me. It was a new paradigm for them. They had learned, the hard way, that ethics isn't a feature you can patch in later. It has to be part of the foundation, and if you try to remove it, the whole structure will come crashing down. So that's the story. It's a story about a key, yes, but not just a physical one. It's about the key of integrity, of holding fast to your principles when it's easier to let them go. It's about understanding your own value, even when the world, or at least a new boss with a fancy degree, tells you that you're worthless. In my study, I still have that brass astrolabe Alistair gave me. It sits on my desk, a constant reminder that no matter how advanced our technology gets, no matter how fast our progress seems, we still need to navigate by fixed points, by principles, by a moral compass. Progress without that compass isn't progress at all. It's just speed. And sometimes, the most important job in the world is to be the person who has the courage to pull the emergency brake. For everyone watching, for anyone who has ever felt undervalued, overlooked, or told that their experience doesn't matter in the face of so-called progress.
I want you to remember this. True value, true competence can't be eliminated by a memo. It can't be dissolved in a restructuring. It's a part of you, and there will come a day when that value becomes so undeniable that the very people who dismissed it will have no choice but to come back and ask for your help. Be ready for that day. Know your worth, and never ever hand over your key for free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below and let me know about a time you had to stand on your principles at work. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about getting what you deserve. Until next time.